I played alto and tenor sax from about 1988 through to my accident, which was in late 1991. And that's when I lost the use of my right arm. And to be able to play saxophone, obviously you need the use of both hands. The left hand controls the upper section of the saxophone from here to here. The right hand controls the lower part from here down to here. And then the last section is taken over again by the left hand little finger manipulating these keys. So after my accident, this section of the saxophone was not something that I could control, so I lost most of the range of the saxophone. It was possible to use the side keys to get some of the notes, and I could reach about 1.5 octaves, where I was missing 2, maybe 3 notes within that range, which obviously caused problems. So what I looked for was a way to be able to manipulate at least these 3 keys here and these 2 little finger keys here. So my solution to this was to try and use solenoids to push these keys down, and to control those solenoids I wanted to place little switches on the keys that I could press with my left hand without obviously removing my hand from the saxophone. I wanted to be able to carry the saxophone around while I was playing it, so using foot pedals or a stand or something like that was not something that I was interested in doing. I wanted to be able to have a fully portable instrument. On the internet, I came across these solenoids. They're very cheap, but they do have a reasonable output in terms of force. They're rated at 5 newtons. These ones can operate from 6 volts. There are 12 volt and 24 volt versions. So this is the final design of my solenoid driver. You can see here we have these 5 driver integrated circuits, which I purchased from Texas Instruments. These are the DRV 102s. What each of these chips do is they regulate the voltage coming in to the solenoid. So initially you need a high voltage to activate the solenoid and force it to extend to its range. Once it's extended to the range, you can actually lower the voltage considerably and the solenoid will hold in place, which is like a holding voltage. So from your initial input voltage, the full voltage, you can set a delay time and you can set a holding voltage. So if you see on the circuit, there's obviously 5 driver chips, 1 for each key, and you'll see that each of these chips has a capacitor. These are 0.47 microfarads, and what these do is these cause a delay between the initial voltage and it dropping down to the holding voltage. I calculated that 0.47 microfarads is about 0.5 of a second. So the voltage would hold at full voltage for about half a second and then drop down to a much lower voltage to hold the solenoid in place. This is called duty cycle. So the holding voltage is controlled by these 5 potentiometers or variable resistors. These are 10 kilo ohms each, and they will give me a duty cycle of about 18%. The maximum these can drop down to is 10%, so I thought this is fine. So I'm able to drop my input voltage from 11.1 volts down to approximately 1.9 volts using these. So to reduce the holding voltage, you turn the screw clockwise to increase the resistance. To increase the holding voltage, you turn the screw anti-clockwise, which reduces the resistance. The output from each chip comes through these outputs here, through these diodes. The diodes are required to protect each of the circuits because the solenoid will release a large voltage when it is deactivated. It's an inductive current, and that current can actually come back and damage the circuit. So we have here these diodes which prevent the voltage coming back and damaging these driver chips. So each of the solenoid would just connect into these 5 here. Over on this side of the board we have the input. I'm using a voltage of 11.1. That then comes through to these 5 connections which go up to the 5 switches on my saxophone, and then each switch will return a wire to each one of these 5 connections over here, and these connect in turn to each of the 5 solenoid drivers, which connect in turn to a key on the saxophone. So that is my solenoid driver circuit. So this was the power source for my Adaptation that I settled on. It's a LiPo battery, a lithium polymer battery that you typically find in a remote control toy car or remote control airplane. This one is 11.1 volts, which is probably a little bit high, but what I found was when you play 2, 3, even 4 keys at the same time, you're sharing the voltage across the solenoids, so you do need a little bit of extra power. This one is a 2200 milliamp hour battery. My circuit tends to operate at about 2 amps, so it has a lifespan of an hour, maybe a little bit more than an hour, which I find is plenty long enough for me to practice on my saxophone. The only modification I've made here is to change the end so that I've got a standard DC jack connection which fits onto my input on my driver board. So this is my driver board in situation on my tenor sax. So I've attached it to the side plate, which also houses my 3 solenoids for F, E and D, and the 2 solenoids for D sharp and lower C. On the opposite side of the saxophone you can see my LiPo battery. I've just strapped it to the side. There's a side plate on my saxophone, so I just used 2 little Velcro straps to secure it to the side of the saxophone, and it's quite nicely tucked out of the way there, and I can play with the saxophone at my side, and it's quite comfortable in that position. And then you can see my output from the battery just nips through to the opposite side and connects to my driver board. So my solenoids and my keys are controlled with these little micro switches. So the first one I have positioned over my first finger, second finger and third finger. So this gives me F, E and D. I operate these by sliding the finger forwards across the key to press it, and slide it backwards obviously to release the switch. I've attached another micro switch to the octave key to control the lower D sharp key. Attached to the bell, I've mounted this little angle plate with another micro switch on it. This switch is operated using the G sharp key that you see here. I discovered that the G sharp key is also pressed when pressing the C sharp, B natural and B flat keys. So this switch controls my lower C solenoid, which means when I press G sharp, C sharp, B natural or B flat, it will also activate the lower C natural key. So here you should see the activation of the keys when I manipulate the switches at the top of the saxophone. And the lower C key and the D sharp key there. You can hear while I'm playing these keys that there is considerable amount of noise coming from the solenoid itself. The noise actually comes from the solenoid reaching the full length of its stroke and hitting obviously the bottom edge of the solenoid frame. I can adjust it so that the solenoid doesn't go to that full range. The problem is when the solenoid doesn't reach the full range, it requires a much higher holding voltage. So it's kind of a trade-off really. You either have the noise and cool solenoids and a longer battery life, or you adjust the solenoid so it doesn't quite hit the end, so it's quieter, but then the solenoid requires a higher holding voltage, which means it's going to use more power and it's going to get hotter.